Charlotte log number 258, January 18th, 2021. The Plateau. So we had a question in the fall about what do you do when you hit a plateau in your practice? And I think the nature of this question is specific to quarantine times. So I've been puzzling with it and not sure how to use words to address it. When we're together as a group, I think we all go through this in multiple phases, different kinds of plateaus, physical, mental, emotional, all levels. And we don't necessarily talk about it at all. I think we come and roll out our mat next to someone who's been on the path 5 and 10 years longer than us. And implicitly, there's something in their way of being that shows what the other side of the plateau is. And just being together as a group is such a strong energy that it gives us the power to move across those plateaus when they come, and they're inevitable. And now in 2D, wow, like there need to be words. But the context is also even richer in a way. So there's 150 or so of us. And now I'm not the only one who's been on the mat for 20 years. There's a whole crew of 10 and 20-year practitioners here. And so I don't know what all those different people have done with the plateau in your different paths that you've been on. But I actually feel like my struggle with putting words to this is something that I'd like to share with those in our group who have been through many, many plateaus as well. What would you say to that earlier self, the many earlier selves who were on the plateaus that you've traversed, if you could just say one thing? George Leonard had this problem in the 60s. He was an Aikido practitioner, and he wrote a book that's kind of one of the main spiritual texts of the old human potential movement. So that's a whole rabbit hole. And take it with a grain of salt. But his book, Mastery, was there to say one main thing to people first encountering the plateau. And it was this: mastery is a quality of practice that comes to those who stay. When the plateau starts, they stay and they keep going. And mastery is a quality that is rare. And the encouragement is to, from my perspective, be able to contribute to the source of the knowledge base and the community by being one of those, one of the many in our group who actually has the wherewithal to deal with the plateau and keep going. Sort of why I have that emphasis on continuity of practice. It's not just for you, although we do know that each of us is a kind of vector of data to test the science of yoga. But we're also, if we want to contribute, the plateau is this first opportunity to make the decision to stay, so that later your practice is not just for you, but for others. So that's the George Leonard thing. Is, well, do you want mastery? Not just for an ego thing, but, for life and the world around you. Then stay when the plateau comes, because it will. So I'm mulling this for months now. I have come up with some of my own sort of more practical words for how to deal with the plateau, so that mastery has a chance to arise long, long from now. The first thing I'd like to say is that the honeymoon is real, and there are honeymoons over and over again in this practice. And falling in love, I think it first happens on a physical level for most of us, or on a mental level. We learn all these tools to know the mind, and to know and transform mentally, physically, energetically, emotionally, psychically, spiritually. And there's a euphoria that happens. But falling in love is also a slightly delusional state. And the delusion, when it comes to humans falling in love with each other, is called limerence. And when you're in limerence, there's like the energy and the effervescence of the excitement of finding this perfect state and this perfect connection. But it means that your perception, you actually disattend to a lot of the gritty, real stuff that comes up in, for example, another person. And we know this, the things that might come to annoy you in a partner in the long run are completely not available to your perception during the state of limerence. Same happens with the practice. And so I want to validate that the honeymoon comes again and again and again and again, but also that there's a wisdom to moving through the honeymoon, so that our perception sort of evens out. And includes the risks and the dark sides, and the completeness of the picture of practice. That doesn't mean that the practice isn't still always new every morning. It is. There's a freshness to the present moment. The deeper we learn to just mulch into that means, and that's sad about yoga, that it's ever new. And I do think that as the wisdom and the ability to perceive deepens and expands, there's still this sense of being constantly surprised. And you become less and less of an annoying know-it-all the longer you go in the practice, because it's all just so surprising. I do think that's an aspect of having gone through many plateaus, that experience becomes newer and newer and fresher and fresher. The longer you stay steady. I would say on the physical level, there's a surprising thing that I'd like to share. Because most of you know, I haven't had new postures in years and years. I've gone, I don't know, I think at one point 9 years without a new posture. I just, do not care. But the postural practice for each and every one of us has this other dimension of time that's actually sort of running through the trajectory of our postural practice. So I'm in my mid-40s, and take, for example, a posture of Kapotasana. The physical experience of that posture is different and actually harder in my mid-40s than it was in my mid-20s on a physical level. My nervous system, however, and my mind are many times over more mature now in my mid-40s than in my mid-20s. And there's a sense of, again, newness and enjoyment about that different mixture of how my mind, my energy, my physical body, my deep mind, and my spirit sort of mix together through this lens of Kapotasana now, vis-a-vis the lens of it early in my 20s. And having a bit of an awareness of the way that Western culture denigrates time, that is not part of the value structure of yoga. The idea that getting old somehow denigrates your practice. Instead, the accumulation of experience leads to wisdom if you're doing it right. We all know old people who are not wise. But in general, if it's working, time serves to increase your wisdom. And that is a whole different meaning for one end of the so-called plateau than the other if you have time on your side to actually help you accumulate experience and use that to inform your practice. There are decades more life experience now that are settled in to my perceptual being that weren't here at the beginning of my practice. So many things I understand now about being a human and about having a body that weren't there before. And harnessing that as a way to keep the practice new I think it's been huge for me. So I'm just really interested in even the raw nuts and bolts of posture through that lens. And it's been a tool that's been important for me in any case. Just like the honeymoon it'll show up for you early in the physical practice. I think that the University of the Plateau, there are very often, if you have a life-changing event, some sort of major reason your schedule changes or illness or an injury, very often, if you want to keep practicing, changes in the physicality and sort of mental situation in your life will force you out of what may have felt like stasis in your practice into one of the other dimensions. And very often people will have new honeymoons when the practice is somehow radically changed. So for example, someone might have a major injury and they know they're going to continue practicing. All of a sudden this bumps you into a figure ground reversal experience, a gestalt shift, where whatever interpretation you had before, say you were doing a practice that was mostly focused on executing postures. Well, all of a sudden, observing the mind or noticing how the energy is different under conditions of that injury. Say there's a pooling of energy in a joint and you have to practice in a different way because that's blocked. All of a sudden, the window opens and you're on a sort of new honeymoon because the energy body becomes the focus of your practice. I see this when people really start to get the Yoga Sutras, which is this insanely brilliant map of the mind. And all of a sudden, the studying of the conditioned mental patterns becomes the forefront of the practice. And this can happen when you've been doing, I've seen it quite a bit actually since we've been studying the sutras every fall systematically. So say you've been practicing posture systematically for 10 years, super developed in your energy body, and this other door opens to the study of mind, and suddenly you're on a new honeymoon, right? So you've navigated that plateau, then the primacy or the figure ground reversal happens again, and the focus is the patternings of the mind stuff. Then again, everything seems ever new, right? So most of us go through numerous honeymoons as the different doors to the different shifts of the human open up. And each of them, when they first open, usually that becomes the most important thing. In the long run, I do think the ground zero of this practice is the energy body. And it's really teaching us to move through the world with a fulcrum of awareness of how we are energy beings who also have all these other layers to us. But I think most of us go through phases of integration where it's primarily a practice of just being in surrender and understanding that your spirit is the center of what you are, and whatever sort of movements of the body and the mind and the emotions happen around it are secondary to that light within you. Each and sort of every one of the layers can fascinate us for different periods. And I just want to validate that the plateau is also just like an event that changes your life. The plateau is very often an opportunity to, without a life-changing event, actually jump into whatever other layer of the practice, be it the mental, the energetic, the emotional, the primacy of the spirit, the subconscious mind, whichever one of those presents itself to you at that moment, usually is the way to help you stay in whatever other like experience of monotony and stasis and repetitiveness that was presenting itself to you. And so the truth of the way in which the practice is ever new is kind of validated by this model of the human that says that there's 5 layers of us. And each and every one of those layers has its own intelligence and its own gravity. So usually if you're bored and you actually feel like you're phoning it in, it's kind of, what am I doing? Like, is this sort of robotic? That can be skillful. To actually say, what is there in this reality that I'm not seeing? Models are really good for that, because the model of the Panchakoshas can simply help you step back and say, according to this model, what am I not seeing, right? The other mechanism that helps you see what you're not seeing is community and teachers, right? Any kind of accountability person or feedback person that you have in your life can help each of us see what we're not seeing. And so often if you're suffering because of monotony and boredom, which is a really fundamental form of human suffering, and it sucks, this is a place where I would actually look for assistance to find what you're not seeing. Even if outwardly the plateau is still going to look the same, that can really change your relationship with it. So again, this is just the beginning of my thoughts on this. And I'd love to hear from others in the community who have found their own skillful ways of staying. Thank you very much. Hope you have a great day.